The polished marble floor of the Sterling Tower lobby reflected the frantic dance of a Tuesday morning. Men in sharp suits and women in power heels moved with a clipped, urgent rhythm, their faces illuminated by the blue glow of smartphones. It was a world of billion-dollar deals and whispered stock tips, a place where importance was measured in the shine of one's shoes and the weight of one's watch. And through it all, moving with a quiet, almost invisible grace, was Arthur Pendleton, pushing his janitor's cart. His grey uniform was faded but clean, his hands, though wrinkled, were meticulous in their work. He moved with a slow, deliberate pace that was a stark contrast to the caffeinated frenzy around him. He saw everything. He saw the young analyst, James, nervously straightening his tie before a big meeting. He saw the receptionist, Maria, discreetly wiping a tear after a harsh phone call. He saw the small kindnesses and the casual cruelties that made up the building's ecosystem. Most people, however, didn't see him at all. He was just part of the scenery, as unremarkable as the potted ferns or the abstract art on the walls. This morning, the air in the lobby's exclusive coffee bar, the Gilded Bean, was particularly thick with tension. At its center, holding court like a petty king, was Marcus Thorne. Marcus was a senior vice president, a man whose ambition was as sharp and sterile as the crease in his trousers. He had a voice that could curdle milk and a smile that never reached his cold, calculating eyes. "Is it that difficult?" he boomed, his voice echoing in the suddenly quiet cafe. He was berating the young waitress, Chloe Jensen. She was new, her hands trembling slightly as she held a silver tray. A few drops of his triple-shot macchiato had spilled onto the saucer. "I ask for a simple coffee, and I get this mess. Is competence too much to ask for in this establishment?" Chloe's face flushed a deep crimson. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Thorne. I'll get you a new one right away." "Don't bother," he sneered, waving a dismissive hand. "You've already wasted enough of my time. Just clean it up, and try not to ruin anyone else's morning." As Chloe hurried away, her eyes glistening, Arthur guided his cart near the table to wipe up a small puddle of water someone had tracked in. He kept his head down, the rhythmic squeak of his cart a familiar, comforting sound. He wanted to say something to the girl, to offer a kind word, but he knew his place. In this world, janitors were meant to be silent. Marcus, however, was not finished with his display of power. Seeing Arthur nearby, a new target presented itself. "You," he snapped, his voice a whip crack. "Watch where you're going with that filthy thing. You're getting water near my briefcase." Arthur paused, his gnarled hands resting on the cart's handle. He looked at the floor. The puddle was a good 5 feet from Marcus's expensive leather briefcase. He said nothing, simply began to steer his cart in a wider arc. This quiet obedience seemed to infuriate Marcus even more. He thrived on confrontation, on making others feel small. Arthur's silent compliance was a denial of that satisfaction. "Did you hear me, old man?" Marcus stood up, his 6-foot frame towering over Arthur's stooped shoulders. "Are you deaf as well as useless?" Arthur finally looked up, his eyes, a surprisingly clear and intelligent blue, meeting Marcus's. "I heard you, sir. There's no need for rudeness." His voice was calm, steady, and held a quiet authority that was utterly at odds with his uniform. The calm response was like a lit match to gasoline. For a man like Marcus, being corrected by a janitor was an intolerable insult. His face contorted in a mask of rage. All the pressure of a deal gone wrong, all the frustrations of his demanding life coalesced into a single ugly point. "Rudeness," he spat, his voice low and menacing. "I'll show you rudeness." And then, in a moment that seemed to slow down for everyone watching, Marcus Thorne drew back his gleaming $1,000 Italian loafer and kicked the side of Arthur's cleaning cart with vicious force. The cart clattered, bottles of cleaning solution and rags spilling across the pristine floor. But his aim was poor, his anger clumsy. The tip of his expensive shoe connected not just with the cart, but with Arthur's shin. Arthur stumbled back, a sharp grunt of pain escaping his lips. He leaned against a pillar for support, his hand instinctively going to his leg. A collective gasp went through the cafe. Chloe stood frozen behind the counter, her hand over her mouth. James, the young analyst, looked on in horror. This wasn't just arrogance anymore, it was assault. Marcus looked down at his shoe, now scuffed. Look what you made me do. You've scuffed my shoe, you imbecile. Arthur straightened up slowly. The pain in his leg was a dull throb, but it was nothing compared to the cold fire that was now spreading through his chest. He had spent months in this building, quietly observing, listening, and waiting. He had seen the best and worst of his company, but this was a sickness. He took a steadying breath and walked directly toward Marcus Thorne. The younger man puffed out his chest, ready for the old janitor to beg for his job, to plead for forgiveness. Instead, Arthur's hand came up. It was not the wild swing of an angry man, but a movement that was precise, controlled, and shockingly fast. The sound of the slap echoed through the lobby like a gunshot. Arthur's open palm connected squarely with Marcus's cheek, the force of it snapping the executive's head to the side. Silence. Utter, profound silence. Marcus Thorne, senior vice president, stood stunned, his cheek blazing red with the imprint of a hand. He touched it gingerly, his expression a mixture of disbelief and sputtering rage. You hit me," he stammered. "You're fired. You're finished. I'll have you arrested. Do you have any idea who I am?" Arthur's blue eyes were like chips of ice. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Every word he spoke landed with the weight of absolute truth. "Yes, I know who you are, Marcus," he said, his voice carrying effortlessly through the cavernous space. "You're a bully and a coward. But the more important question is, do you have any idea who I am?" Marcus just gawked, speechless. Arthur gestured around him, a sweep of his arm that encompassed the soaring marble walls, the gleaming brass fixtures, the very air they were breathing. "You are a senior vice president in a company that operates within this building," Arthur stated, his voice as solid as the granite foundation beneath their feet. "But I own this entire building, and as of this moment, Marcus, you no longer work in it." The silence that followed Arthur's declaration was a physical thing, a heavy blanket that smothered the lobby's usual hum. For a moment, no one moved. No one breathed. The statement was so audacious, so utterly unbelievable, that the collective mind of everyone present struggled to process it. A janitor, own the Sterling Tower, a billion-dollar piece of prime real estate. It was the stuff of fantasy. Marcus Thorne was the first to break the spell. A choked, incredulous laugh escaped his lips. It was a harsh, ugly sound. "You? You own this building?" He pointed a trembling finger at Arthur's faded uniform. "You're a delusional old fool. You just assaulted an executive, and now you're making up pathetic fantasies. Security! Get security down here now!" He fumbled for his phone, his fingers shaking with a mixture of rage and adrenaline. He was already composing the lawsuit in his head, imagining the ruin he would bring down upon this insolent old man. Chloe, from behind the counter, watched with wide, terrified eyes. She had seen the kick, she had heard the slap. But this claim, it was impossible. Yet there was something in the old man's eyes, a steely certainty that sent a shiver down her spine. He wasn't raving, he was stating a fact. Two security guards, their uniforms crisp and their expressions grim, arrived within a minute. They were led by David Chen, the head of building security, a man with 20 years of service and an unflappable demeanor. "Mr. Thorne," David said, his voice calm and professional, "we received a call about a disturbance." "A disturbance?" Marcus shrieked, his composure shattering completely. This lunatic assaulted me, he hit me, and now he's claiming he owns the building. I want him arrested. I want him thrown in jail." David Chen's gaze shifted from Marcus's flushed, furious face to the old janitor standing calmly amidst the spilled cleaning supplies. David's professional mask flickered for a fraction of a second. A look of dawning recognition, mixed with something akin to dread, crossed his features. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "Mr. Pendleton," David said, his voice now laced with a deep, unmistakable respect. "Is everything all right, sir?" The use of "sir" was like a bomb going off in the lobby. Marcus's jaw dropped. The whispers that had started among the onlookers grew into a wave of confused murmurs. Marcus whirled on the security chief. "What did you just call him?" "Mr. Pendleton. Are you part of this ridiculous charade?" David Chen ignored Marcus completely. He walked over to Arthur. "Sir, are you harmed? Should I call for medical assistance?" Arthur waved a hand dismissively, his gaze still locked on the sputtering executive. "I'm quite all right, David. Thank you. My shin will have a bruise, but my dignity is intact. I can't say the same for Mr. Thorne." The reality of the situation began to crash down on Marcus Thorne with the force of a tidal wave. The security chief's deference, the name Pendleton, it suddenly clicked with a terrifying chime of recognition. Arthur Pendleton, the reclusive, almost mythical founder of Pendleton Holdings, the parent corporation that owned not just this tower, but a vast empire of real estate and investments. He was a legend in the business world, a man who hadn't been seen publicly in over a decade. Marcus's face went from a furious red to a pasty, sickly white. The blood drained from his head so fast he felt dizzy. His legs felt weak, as if the bones had turned to water. He looked at Arthur, truly looked at him for the first time, and saw not a janitor, but the architect of his entire world. The man who held his past, present, and future in the palm of his calloused hand. "No," Marcus whispered, the word barely audible. "It can't be." "I assure you it can," Arthur said, his voice devoid of triumph. He sounded weary, disappointed. "I've been working in this building for 6 months, David. You know this. I wanted to see the company I built from the ground up, not from the boardroom, but from the mailroom, from the hallways. I wanted to see its soul." He turned his gaze to the assembled crowd of employees who were now staring at him as if he were a ghost. A company's soul isn't in its profit margins or its stock price. It's in how people treat each other. It's in how the person cleaning the floor is treated by the person on the top floor. He looked back at Marcus, and for the first time a flicker of genuine anger showed in his eyes. "And what I have seen from you, Mr. Thorne, is a culture of fear, arrogance, and disrespect. You are a cancer in this organization. The kick was just a symptom of a much deeper disease." Arthur then turned to Chloe, who was still standing, pale and trembling, behind the counter. His expression softened instantly. "Young lady," he said, his voice now gentle, "what is your name?" "Chloe, sir. Chloe Jensen," she stammered. "Chloe," Arthur repeated, nodding. "You showed great composure in the face of extreme rudeness. I apologize for what you had to endure in one of my establishments." He then looked at David Chen. "David, please escort Mr. Thorne to his office. Have him pack his personal belongings. His access is to be revoked immediately. He is not to set foot in this building again." "Yes, sir," David said, gesturing to his guards. Marcus, finally jolted from his stupor, found his voice. "You can't do this. I have a contract. I'll sue you for everything you have." Arthur gave a sad, tired smile. "Go ahead, Marcus. Please, try. My legal team is a bit more formidable than the janitorial staff." "Now if you'll excuse me," he said, bending down with a slight wince to pick up a fallen bottle of window cleaner. "I have a mess to clean up." The sight was surreal, the billionaire owner of the Sterling Tower on his hands and knees, tidying a mess created by the man he had just fired. The message was clearer than any boardroom memo. In Arthur Pendleton's world, everyone, no matter their station, was expected to clean up their own mess. And Marcus Thorne's was about to get a whole lot bigger. To understand why a man like Arthur Pendleton would trade a leather-bound boardroom chair for a janitor's cart, you had to understand Eleanor. Everything in Arthur's life, from the sprawling empire he had built to the quiet ache in his heart, circled back to her. They had met in a community college night class. He was a scholarship kid, working 2 jobs to pay for his books, his hands perpetually stained with grease from his work at a garage. She was the daughter of Franklin Sterling, the man whose name would one day adorn the very tower Arthur now owned. Eleanor saw past the grease and the worn-out clothes. She saw the fierce intelligence in his eyes, the relentless drive, and the profound kindness he showed to everyone, from the college dean to the woman who served them coffee at a cheap diner. Her father, Franklin, was less impressed. He saw a boy from the wrong side of the tracks, a nobody with ambitions far beyond his station. He forbade Eleanor from seeing him, but Eleanor had a spine of steel to match her gentle heart. She chose Arthur. They married in a simple courthouse ceremony, with only 2 friends as witnesses. For years, Franklin Sterling refused to even speak to Arthur. But Arthur didn't care about his approval. He only cared about building a life worthy of Eleanor. He started a small construction business with a beat-up truck and a handful of tools. He worked 18-hour days, his body aching but his spirit soaring. Eleanor was his partner in everything. She kept the books, made the calls, and packed his lunch every single day. She believed in him with a ferocity that was his constant fuel. His big break came during a minor recession. While larger companies were panicking and shedding assets, Arthur, with Eleanor's sharp financial guidance, saw an opportunity. They bought up undervalued properties, renovated them with their own hands, and built a reputation for quality and integrity. His company grew, slowly at first, then with astonishing speed. He never forgot his roots. He knew the names of every one of his foremen, every carpenter, every plumber. He treated them like family because for a long time they were the only family he had. Years later, when Franklin Sterling's own massive corporation was on the brink of collapse due to mismanagement and hubris, it was Arthur who anonymously bought up the debt and stabilized the company, saving it from bankruptcy. He did it not for Franklin, but for Eleanor. It was her father's legacy, and it mattered to her. When Franklin finally discovered who his silent benefactor was, he was a broken, humbled man. He called Arthur to his office in the newly christened Sterling Tower, a building Arthur's company had just finished constructing. In that vast, opulent space, the old man finally offered his hand. "I was wrong about you, son," he had said, his voice thick with emotion. "You're a better man than I ever was." The reconciliation was a joy for Eleanor. For a few precious years, they were a complete family. Arthur and Eleanor, now fantastically wealthy, never changed. They lived in the same modest house they had bought decades earlier. They drove sensible cars. Their greatest pleasure was their anonymity, their ability to walk through the world unburdened by the weight of their fortune. Then 5 years ago, Eleanor got sick. It was fast, aggressive, and cruel. Arthur poured all his resources into finding a cure, consulting with the best doctors in the world. But it was no use. In her final months, they talked a lot about the company, about their life's work. "It's gotten so big, Artie," she whispered one evening, her hand frail in his. "Don't let it lose its heart. Don't let it become one of those cold, faceless places where people are just numbers on a spreadsheet. Promise me you'll remember the little guy, the people like us, when we were starting out." He promised. After she was gone, the world lost its color. The company, their great achievement, felt hollow. The board meetings were filled with talk of derivatives, mergers, and synergy, a language he barely recognized. He saw a new generation of executives rising through the ranks, men like Marcus Thorne, who were slick, ruthless, and utterly detached from the human cost of their decisions. They had never poured concrete or framed a wall. They had never known the fear of not making payroll. 1 year ago, on the anniversary of Eleanor's death, Arthur made a decision. He was tired of reading sanitized reports from his executives. He wanted to see the truth for himself. He officially stepped down as CEO, handing the reins to a trusted longtime colleague, and simply vanished from public life. He created a new identity for himself, Arthur Jones, a widower looking for quiet, simple work. He applied for a janitorial position at the Sterling Tower through a third-party contractor. His background check was clean, his references fabricated but solid. He was hired. For 6 months, he pushed his cart through the gleaming hallways of the empire he had built. It was a painful and enlightening pilgrimage. He learned more in those 6 months than he had in the previous 10 years of board meetings. He saw which managers inspired their teams and which ones ruled by fear. He saw the quiet struggles of the cleaning staff, the security guards, the cafeteria workers, the invisible army that kept his glittering tower running. He saw the kindness of people like Chloe Jensen, who always had a smile for him, and the casual cruelty of men like Marcus Thorne, who saw him as less than human. He was looking for the heart of his company, the one Eleanor had asked him to protect. He was beginning to fear he wouldn't find it. The incident in the coffee shop wasn't just an insult to him as a man. It was a desecration of Eleanor's memory. Marcus Thorne hadn't just kicked a janitor. He had kicked the very foundation of decency and respect upon which Arthur had built his entire world. As he stood there in the lobby, the billionaire in a janitor's uniform, he wasn't just firing a troublesome employee, he was fulfilling a deathbed promise. He was taking back the soul of his company. And he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that this was only the beginning. For Marcus Thorne, the world had shrunk to the confines of his corner office, a glass cage suspended 40 floors above the city. Just an hour ago, this room had been his throne, a symbol of his power and success. The panoramic view of the skyline was his kingdom. Now it felt like a prison, the city outside a mocking witness to his spectacular fall from grace. He sat heavily in his ergonomic leather chair, the silence of the room broken only by the frantic thumping of his own heart. The two security guards stood impassively by the door, their presence a constant, humiliating reminder of his new status as a pariah. David Chen had been coldly efficient. "Mr. Pendleton's orders, sir. You have 30 minutes to collect your personal effects." His mind reeled, trying to catch up with the cataclysmic shift in his reality. Arthur Pendleton, the janitor, the owner. The words looped in his brain, a nonsensical mantra of his own destruction. He had built his entire career on the art of reading people, of identifying weaknesses and leveraging power. How had he missed this? How could he have been so blind? He had always seen the service staff as furniture, functional but inanimate. He never learned their names, never met their eyes. They were beneath his notice, obstacles to be navigated or tools to be used. The old janitor had been just another piece of scenery, and Marcus, in his arrogance, had decided to kick it. He had kicked a sleeping dragon. His hands trembled as he picked up his phone. His first instinct was to call his lawyer, a shark named Peterson, who had gotten him out of more than one sticky situation. "Peterson," he barked into the phone, his voice tight with panic. "I've been terminated, unlawfully. I was assaulted at work and then fired without cause. I want to sue. I want to burn them to the ground." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Marcus," Peterson said, his voice unusually cautious. "I've already heard some rumors. They're flying all over the financial district. Is it true? About Arthur Pendleton?" "It's a lie, a ridiculous—" Marcus started, but the lie died in his throat. He couldn't sustain it. "Yes," he finally admitted, the word tasting like ash. "It's true." The silence on the line was longer this time. When Peterson finally spoke, his voice was funereal. "Marcus, I can't represent you." "What? What do you mean you can't represent me? I pay you a fortune." "You don't understand," Peterson said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You didn't just get fired from a job. You picked a fight with a god. Arthur Pendleton's personal legal team is the stuff of legend. They don't litigate, they annihilate. My firm has contracts with 3 different subsidiaries of Pendleton Holdings. If I take your case, my partners will have my head on a platter before lunch. No one will touch this, Marcus. No one." The line went dead. Marcus stared at the phone in his hand, a cold dread seeping into his bones. He was alone. He tried his mentor, a board member named Richard Davies, a man he had golfed with just last weekend. The call went straight to voicemail. He sent a frantic text. The reply came back a minute later, cold and clinical. "Marcus, I've been advised not to have any contact with you. I'm sorry, it's over." It was then that he truly understood. He hadn't just lost a job, he had been excommunicated. The world he had fought so viciously to conquer had cast him out with terrifying speed and finality. His network, his connections, the web of favors and alliances he had so carefully cultivated, it had all dissolved in an instant. He looked around his office, the framed photos of him shaking hands with politicians, the awards for Executive of the Year, the lucite trophies celebrating successful mergers. They were all monuments to a life that no longer existed. He had defined himself by his title, his salary, his position in the hierarchy. Without them, who was he? He was the son of a man who had also been powerful, a father who had measured love in stock options and approval in promotions. Marcus had spent his entire life desperately trying to earn that approval, to be more ruthless, more successful, more feared than his old man. He had adopted his father's creed: kindness is weakness, and empathy is for fools. He had treated those below him with contempt because it was how his father had taught him to demonstrate strength. And for what? His father was gone now, and all Marcus had was an empty office and the burning shame of being brought down by a man in a janitor's uniform. The slap was nothing compared to this. The slap was a momentary sting. This was the complete and utter unraveling of his identity. One of the guards cleared his throat. "Sir, your time is up." Numbly, Marcus stood. He picked up a small, silver-framed photo from his desk. It was the only truly personal item in the room. It was a picture of him and his ex-wife, taken years ago on a beach. They were smiling, genuinely happy. It was before the promotions, before the relentless ambition had consumed him and poisoned their marriage. He remembered what she had said when she left him. "You've become a beautiful, empty suit, Marcus. There's nothing left inside." He had laughed at her then. Now her words echoed in the silent, empty office. He slipped the photo into his briefcase, along with his laptop and a few files. He didn't even look at the awards. They were worthless. As the guards escorted him to a service elevator, the same one the cleaning staff used, he saw his reflection in the polished steel doors. He saw a man in a perfectly tailored suit, with a scuffed shoe and a red mark on his cheek. But for the first time, he also saw the terrified, insecure boy who was still trying to impress a father who was long dead. He had reached the top of the mountain, only to find himself completely, irrevocably alone. The descent was going to be brutal. The gilded bean, which had been the stage for Marcus Thorne's downfall, was now buzzing with a nervous energy. Every employee in the Sterling Tower, it seemed, had found a reason to grab a coffee, hoping to catch a glimpse of the now legendary janitor billionaire or to hear a first-hand account of the morning's events. Chloe Jensen found herself at the epicenter of this storm. She was no longer just a new waitress. She was a key witness, a central character in the corporate fairy tale that was unfolding. People who had never given her a second glance now approached her with hushed reverence. "You were right there," they'd ask. "What was it like?" They treated her like she had seen a miracle. To Chloe, it had felt more like surviving an earthquake. She was still shaken, her hands trembling as she poured coffee, replaying the scene over and over in her mind. The sneer on Marcus's face, the sickening thud of his shoe hitting the cart, the sharp crack of that slap. Late in the afternoon, a woman in a sharp, understated pantsuit approached the counter. She had an air of quiet efficiency about her. "Chloe Jensen?" she asked. "Yes," Chloe replied nervously, wiping her hands on her apron. "My name is Sarah Evans. I'm from Mr. Pendleton's personal office. He has requested to speak with you. Would you be willing to come upstairs?" Chloe's heart hammered against her ribs. Go upstairs? To the executive floors? She had only ever seen them in pictures. "Me? Why?" "He was very impressed by your professionalism under duress," Sarah said with a small, reassuring smile. "And he believes you may be able to provide some valuable insight. You won't be in any trouble, I promise." Nodding numbly, Chloe untied her apron and followed Sarah to a private elevator she never knew existed. It required a special keycard and ascended with a silent, swift grace. They bypassed the executive floors and went all the way to the penthouse, a level marked simply P. The doors opened, not into an office, but into what looked like a comfortable, elegantly furnished apartment. Books lined the walls, the furniture was tasteful and well-worn, and through a wall of glass, a private garden terrace was visible, a splash of green against the grey cityscape. And there, sitting in an armchair by the window, was Arthur Pendleton. He was no longer wearing the janitor's uniform. He was dressed in a simple pair of trousers and a soft cashmere sweater. He looked less like a billionaire and more like a kindly grandfather. He stood as they entered. "Chloe, thank you for coming. Please, sit down. Can Sarah get you anything? Tea? Water?" "Water would be nice, thank you," she managed to say, her voice a squeak. She sat on the edge of a plush sofa, feeling completely out of place. This was the man who owned it all. The man she had seen mopping floors just this morning. "I want to apologize again for what you went through today," Arthur began, his tone gentle. "No employee in any of my buildings should ever be subjected to that kind of abuse." It's okay," she stammered. "No, it's not," he said firmly. "It's the opposite of okay. Which is why I've asked you here." "Chloe, the incident with Marcus Thorne was not an isolated event, was it?" Chloe hesitated, her gaze dropping to her lap. To speak up was terrifying. Marcus Thorne had friends, and even if he was gone, his culture might remain. People who made waves often found themselves out of a job. She was a student, working 2 jobs to pay her tuition. She couldn't afford to lose this one. Arthur seemed to read her mind. "I understand your hesitation. You're worried about repercussions. Let me be perfectly clear. You have my personal guarantee that your job is secure. More than that, you have my gratitude. The truth is the most valuable commodity in any business, and it is often the hardest to come by. She looked into his clear blue eyes and saw the same quiet strength she had seen in the lobby, but now it was paired with a genuine kindness. She took a deep breath. "No, sir," she said, her voice growing stronger. "It wasn't. Mr. Thorne, he was like that with a lot of the service staff. He would snap his fingers at us. He called the baristas coffee monkeys. Last week, he made one of the busboys cry because he thought his table wasn't cleared fast enough. We were all afraid of him." She continued, the words tumbling out now that the dam had broken. She told him about how managers would demand free food and then complain about the service to get staff in trouble. She described how maintenance workers were often treated like dirt, their concerns about safety or repairs ignored by executives who couldn't be bothered. She painted a picture of two different worlds within the same building, the glossy, privileged world of the upper floors and the invisible, often disrespected world of the people who kept it all running. Arthur listened intently, his expression growing more and more somber. He didn't interrupt. He just let her speak, his gaze never wavering. He was hearing the unvarnished truth he had come to find, and it was uglier than he had imagined. What he had witnessed with Marcus wasn't just one bad apple. It was a symptom of a rot that had spread through the culture of his company. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment. "Thank you, Chloe," he said finally, his voice heavy. "Thank you for your courage and your honesty. You've given me a great deal to think about." He then changed the subject. "Sarah tells me you're a student. What are you studying?" "Business administration, sir," she replied, surprised by the question. "At the City College." Arthur smiled, a genuine warm smile. "My wife, Eleanor, was a brilliant businesswoman. She always said that a good business isn't about numbers. It's about people. It seems you understand that better than many of my top executives." He stood and walked over to a large desk. "I am launching a full, top-to-bottom review of corporate culture and employee relations at this company. I want to create a new program, an internal oversight committee, to ensure that every single employee is treated with dignity and respect. It needs a fresh perspective. It needs someone who understands the view from the ground floor." He turned back to her. "Chloe, I would like to offer you a paid internship, starting immediately, to help me lead this initiative. You would work directly with my office. We will work around your class schedule, and Pendleton Holdings will cover the full cost of your tuition and books until you graduate." Chloe stared at him, speechless. Her mind couldn't comprehend the words. An internship? In the owner's office? Her tuition paid? It was a dream she wouldn't have even dared to have. Tears welled in her eyes, but this time they were not tears of fear or humiliation. "Sir, I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Just say yes," Arthur said gently. "Honesty and integrity should be rewarded, not punished. You didn't just serve coffee today, Chloe. You served the truth. And in this building, that makes you the most valuable person I've met." The boardroom on the 45th floor was a place of immense power, designed to intimidate. A single, monolithic table of dark mahogany stretched across the room, surrounded by 20 high-backed leather chairs. One entire wall was glass, offering a god's-eye view of the sprawling city below. This was where billion-dollar destinies were decided. For the past decade, it had been a place of predictable, sterile procedure. Today, it was a crucible. The board members and senior executives sat stiffly in their chairs, a palpable tension in the air. They were the titans of their industry, men and women accustomed to being in control. But today they were all waiting, like nervous school children, for the principal. The news of Arthur Pendleton's return had sent shockwaves through the entire corporate structure. They had all, in one way or another, grown comfortable with his absence, running the company he built according to their own modern, often ruthless philosophies. Now the founder was back, and he had been hiding in plain sight, watching them. The doors opened, and Arthur Pendleton walked in. He was not the humble janitor, nor the kindly grandfather from the penthouse. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal grey suit, the kind of quiet, expensive garment that bespoke immense power without having to shout. His blue eyes, which had been gentle with Chloe, were now sharp and piercing. He moved with the unshakable confidence of a man who owned every molecule of air in the room. He took his place at the head of the table in the chair that had sat empty for years. "Good morning," he said, his voice calm but resonant. It carried to every corner of the silent room. "I'm sure you are all aware of the events of yesterday morning. Some of you may view it as an unfortunate incident involving a single employee. You would be wrong. It was a symptom of a disease that has infected the culture of this company. A disease of arrogance, of entitlement, of disrespect. A disease that I allowed to grow in my absence." He let his gaze travel around the table, meeting the eyes of each person there. Some looked ashamed, others defiant, most simply fearful. "When my wife and I started this company," he continued, his voice softening slightly with the memory, "we had one rule: treat people well. Treat your employees well. Treat your clients well. Treat your suppliers well. We believed that profit was a byproduct of integrity, not the other way around. It seems that somewhere along the line, that core principle has been forgotten. It has been replaced by a relentless pursuit of the bottom line at any human cost." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "Yesterday, I saw a senior vice president of this company physically and verbally assault a member of the cleaning staff. And what was most disturbing was not the act itself, but the fact that no one intervened. Not one person in that crowded lobby stepped in to say, 'This is wrong.' They were either too scared or too indifferent. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is a catastrophic failure of leadership. Your failure and mine." He gestured to his aide, Sarah, who dimmed the lights. A screen descended from the ceiling. On it appeared a series of secretly recorded video clips, time-stamped over the past 6 months. They showed Marcus Thorne berating a mailroom clerk. They showed another executive mocking a cafeteria worker's accent. They showed a group of traders leaving a disgusting mess in a conference room, laughing and saying, "Let the help clean it up." With each clip, the atmosphere in the room grew colder. The executives squirmed in their seats. This was not the sanitized data of HR reports. This was the raw, ugly truth of their daily operations. When the lights came up, Arthur's expression was grim. "This is the company you have been running. A place where the people who do the hardest, most essential work are treated as invisible, as less than human. This is not the company Eleanor and I built." He then nodded to the door. David Chen opened it and escorted a pale, haggard-looking Marcus Thorne into the room. Marcus looked like a man who hadn't slept. His expensive suit rumpled, his eyes hollow. He avoided looking at anyone, his gaze fixed on the floor. "Mr. Thorne," Arthur said, his voice like steel, "please have a seat." A chair had been placed for him at the far end of the table, separate from the others. He sat, looking small and defeated. "I did not bring you here to humiliate you further," Arthur said, surprising everyone. "Your public actions accomplished that more effectively than I ever could. I brought you here because you are the most visible example of the culture I am determined to eradicate. I want everyone in this room to see the end result of a philosophy that places title above humanity." Arthur turned his attention back to the board. "Effective immediately, I am resuming my full-time duties as chairman of Pendleton Holdings. We are instituting a new zero-tolerance policy for workplace harassment and disrespect at every level. We will be establishing an independent employee advocacy council with representatives from every department, from maintenance to marketing, to report directly to my office. We are overhauling our bonus structure. From now on, 30% of every executive's bonus will be tied directly to the satisfaction and well-being scores of their lowest-paid subordinates." A ripple of shock went through the room. This wasn't just a speech, it was a revolution. "Some of you," Arthur said, his eyes scanning the faces before him, "will find these new measures uncomfortable. You will see them as a hindrance to efficiency. Those of you who feel that way are welcome to tender your resignations. I will accept them without prejudice, but for those who stay, know this: a new day has begun at this company. We will be profitable, yes, but we will be good first. We will be a place where the person who cleans the toilets is shown the same courtesy as the person who signs the checks." He then looked at Marcus one last time. "As for you, Mr. Thorne, your severance will be paid according to your contract, but I am also sending you a bill. It is for the full replacement cost of a new janitorial cart and one pair of Italian leather shoes, which I understand were scuffed. I find it's always important to pay for what you've broken." With that final, devastatingly precise statement, Arthur stood. "The work begins now. Let's not waste any more time." He walked out of the boardroom, leaving behind a group of stunned executives and one broken man, the silence they left in their wake filled with the terrifying sound of change. 6 months later, the light inside the Sterling Tower felt different. It wasn't just the afternoon sun streaming through the vast lobby windows, it was a change in the atmosphere, a lightness that hadn't been there before. The frantic, anxious energy of the past had been replaced by a calmer, more collaborative hum. People smiled at each other more. Executives held doors open for mailroom clerks. The Gilded Bean was no longer a stage for power plays, but simply a place where people from all floors could grab a coffee and talk. The changes had been seismic. Arthur Pendleton had been true to his word. The Dignity in the Workplace initiative, spearheaded by a surprisingly adept Chloe Jensen, had rolled out across the company. Anonymous reporting channels were established, and managers underwent mandatory empathy and leadership training. Several executives who couldn't adapt to the new culture resigned to pursue other opportunities. They were not missed. Arthur was a constant, visible presence. He had reclaimed his penthouse office, but he was rarely in it. Most days, he could be found walking the floors, not as a janitor, but as himself. He'd sit with the coders in the IT department, asking about their projects. He'd have lunch in the employee cafeteria, sharing a table with security guards and administrative assistants. He knew people's names, asked about their families, and listened to their ideas. He was managing his company the way he had first built it, person by person. Chloe Jensen had blossomed. The internship had become a permanent position as an associate on the chairman's staff. She was still attending her night classes, Arthur had insisted, but during the day she was his eyes and ears on the ground floor. She had a natural talent for connecting with people, for making them feel heard. The timid waitress who had once trembled before Marcus Thorne now confidently presented reports in the main boardroom, her voice clear and strong. This afternoon, she found Arthur in his private terrace garden, tending to a small collection of rose bushes. He said they had been Eleanor's favorite. He wore simple gardening gloves and had a smudge of dirt on his cheek. "The quarterly satisfaction reports are in, Mr. Pendleton," Chloe said, holding a tablet. "Please, Chloe," he said, not looking up from a stubborn weed. "After all this time, it's Arthur." She smiled. "Arthur, the numbers are remarkable. Employee morale is up 40% across the board. Sick days are down. And here's the interesting part. Productivity in the departments with the highest morale has increased by almost 15%. The board is ecstatic." Arthur chuckled, finally straightening up and pulling off his gloves. Imagine that. Treating people like human beings is actually good for business. Eleanor would have found that immensely amusing. He looked out over the city, his city, that stretched to the horizon. "It's easy to lose your way when you're up this high," he said, his voice reflective. "You forget what the foundation looks like. You forget that the entire tower rests on the hard work of people you never see." I needed to be reminded of that. He turned to Chloe, his expression serious. "Thank you, Chloe, for not being afraid to tell the truth." "Thank you, Arthur," she replied, her voice filled with genuine emotion. "For being willing to listen." Down below in the lobby, a new janitor, a young man named Luis, was pushing his cart. A young executive, rushing for the door, accidentally bumped into him, knocking a spray bottle to the floor. The executive stopped immediately. "Oh man, I am so sorry," he said, quickly bending down to pick up the bottle. "My fault completely." "No problem," Luis said with a smile. "It happens." The executive smiled back, clapped him lightly on the shoulder, and hurried on his way. From his perch high above, Arthur Pendleton couldn't see that small interaction. But he could feel it. He could feel it in the air. The heart of his company, the one he had feared was lost, was beating strong once more. It had been there all along, in the quiet dignity of the people who kept the lights on. All he had to do was come down from his throne and remember how to see it. The Sterling Tower was more than just a building of steel and glass. It was, once again, a house built on a foundation of respect. And it was stronger than ever.